All right, I've got the 938 tool. So I have the O-ring and the shims removed here. This goes inside here. We're going to put this on a press. And then we're going to take this 266. This is 884 2666. And very carefully you want to center this. And then we're going to press that assembly out of it. Now what I typically do, I can tell you that in the book, put a rag inside here. If you have a smaller one, that's fine, but just pack a rag inside here. So the gear, when it pops off, it doesn't smash into the metal press. So I'm gonna go press that apart. All right, I'm used to DPS so much. I was reading the book, but I got the snap ring out, and then I saw this large shoulder washer, and I just thought you put the 266 tool on here and press it out. That doesn't work. You have to actually take this shoulder washer out. So reach in here and you have to work the shoulder washer out. Now what I did was I popped the seal out too. So let me get the shoulder washer out. So now you can actually see the gear is down in there, and this shoulder washer is bigger. It actually fits over the gear and recesses. So if you try to press the shaft out with this in place, you're pressing against everything. So let me get the seal out of the way. And you can see there's the bearing, and this actually seats against the bearing and the shaft. So you can't press it apart until you take this shoulder ring out. Once you take the shoulder ring out, this is the 266 tool, and that one will actually fit onto the shaft, the gear, should I say, the gear shaft. And you center that and press that out. All right, I've got the 938 tool. I got the O-ring and the shims removed here. This goes inside here. We're going to put this on a press, and then we're going to take this 266. This is 884 2666, and very carefully you want to center this in the gear. Don't put it offset because you have that O-ring seat there, and you don't want to mash the edge of the metal over. That'll cut the O-ring. And then we're going to press that assembly out of it. Now what I typically do, I can tell you that in the book, put a rag inside here. If you have a smaller one, that's fine, but just pack a rag inside here. So the gear, when it pops off, it doesn't smash into the metal press. So I'm gonna go press that apart. All right, so bearing gets pressed out of the gear, comes out of the housing, no problem. Okay, we gotta press that bearing, and you can really see now what water got in there, but amazingly it did not affect the gear. It didn't get inside the gear ratio somehow, amazingly. I haven't seen anything that bad, but I'm gonna have to press this gear off of the bearing splitter, and I have to press this bearing out of the housing. Then we'll get bearings and races for it and get ready to put it back together. All right, so I got the bearing pressed out of the housing, and I have the crush sleeve. This is a different size crush sleeve, or pre-tension sleeve they call it, so I'll need a new one of those. Now I'm going to get a bearing splitter. I'm going to destroy this bearing, getting it off, put it in a vise, crush the bearing splitter down, clamp it down, tighten it up, then put it in a press, and then press the bearing off the gear. Again, we're going to get lucky, I think, because we can reuse the gears. So it's just going to be bearings and seals in the supper to rebuild it. I've got to get the special tools to pull this race out, as well as that race, and you can see these are not in good shape. So I'll get the special tools out and show you the special tools to pull the races out, and then the bearing splitter for this. So the three tools you need are 938, you need this 884 933 tool, and you need the standard 884 801 press tool that's going to fit in that tool like such. Now the tricky part is to get this fits like this, and then you have to get this tool down inside and just barely rest it on the two ledges of the bearing. So if I flip it over, you can see that a little bit better. So it fits on the inside lip edge. So if you look at it, don't fall on the floor. You can see it has that lip edge, so that has to face against that race. So this tool will press the first race out as such, and then we'll flip it over on a vise like on this surface, and we can press the other race out. So I'll go do that next. Okay, we're getting ready to put the upper gear back together for the input bearing box, and I've already pressed the races for the two bearings back into the case. So the tool you use for that is the 884-932 tool. The large end step then presses the base on the inside, that presses that race in. Then you flip this tool over and you use this side of the tool to press that race back in. So I've already pressed those back in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the larger of the two bearings, and I'm going to press this bearing back onto the gear. So the bearings are destroyed, the gear cleaned up just fine, and so we're going to reuse the gear and we're just going to put new bearings on it. So I'm going to press this bearing back on this shaft, lube it up with some oil, press it on. You use the 263 tool to press that back on. We're then going to put a new crush sleeve on here. So we're going to put a new crush sleeve on top of that bearing when we put it back together. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take this bearing and we're going to put this assembly on here, and we're going to press that bearing on here between the housings to start our preload procedure for this. So I'm going to go press the bearing on and get that set up. So one other thing that I found was I want to keep this gear off of the press. When I press on it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on a press. I'm going to flip this gear over. I'm going to put it on like that. All right, I've pressed the bearing onto the gear. Now I've got to put the crush sleeve on top of that gear assembly. All right, I have the gear and the bearing, brand new crush sleeve. I'm going to take the bearing box, put that on there. Then I need to put some lubricant on the inside of this bearing. So then I'm going to press the bearing on top of the gear, and I'm going to use the 884-263 tool. I'm going to go on the press. I'm going to press this down until I can spin this, but I take all the rock out of the bearings. So you have to allow it to spin freely, but you don't have any rock in it. That's the beginning point to set the bearing preload on this assembly. So I'm going to go press that together now. Okay, so it's all pressed back together, okay, and it has no rock in it, and I can spin it freely. So that's the point at which we want to press it together. Don't over press it. If you do, then you have to take it all apart and you have to put a new crush sleeve in it. All right, next we're going to put the seal in. So the seal goes, the open side goes down into the case as you took it out. Here's the old one. All right, we're done with that. We're going to use the same tool, that 932 tool. I'm going to take the 938 tool. I'm going to put this on a press, set this in here, keep it nice and square. All right, so we're going to put the seal in next. And when I put the seal in, there is a ledge that the seal will hit. So don't over press it. When you press it in there, just press it until it just lightly stops. The seal lip faces in, solid side out. So I'm just going to center this, put this in here. Fight me. And then I take the same 932 tool. I'm going to put that in there, make sure that's centered. I'm going to put that in a press. I can use that 263 tool and I can press that seal until it just bottoms out. So the next part of it is I got my snap ring pliers with my snap ring ready to go, and I'm going to reinstall that when I bring it back. And then that assembly's ready for setting up the rolling torque. All right, I've got the seal in and I put the snap ring in with my snap ring pliers, and the next thing is I have my sealing ring here, and that actually fits between the seal and it actually rides onto the shaft. So there's an O-ring here that you have to replace, and that O-ring is in the O-ring kit here. Okay, so here's the new O-ring. I'm gonna have to put the new O-ring in the sealing ring. I actually put a new sealing ring in here too. A little bit of little grease on here to hold it in place. And then that is going to go onto the yoke shaft. So this is going to face onto the yoke shaft as such, and that is the sealing surface. So I'm gonna clean this surface off and put the sealing ring on there, and then that's gonna go down inside the housing. And then I'm going to put a new bolt. I have a new bolt and a drop of Loctite that's going to hold that together. So we're going to do that now. Okay, I put a little grease around the edge of the seal. Got my sealing ring and the new O-ring on here. I'm going to take the yoke shaft and I'm going to put the sealing ring over this. It's a pretty tight fit, so you got to go careful when you put this together. Right, just kind of wiggle it on there till it goes on there. Once that's in there, that O-ring seals this side, then the seal fits on this. Unlike DPS, where you actually have a large yoke shaft. So in DPS, you have a large yoke shaft that actually the seal rides right on, and it's a totally different seal part number than this. So there's a lot of differences between this one and a DPS. So I don't think you can do it just based on your knowledge of that. This takes a little bit more work. So now that I have that assembly ready, I'm going to put this on here, slide this through. I got everything greased up. I'm going to put a dab of grease on the outside of the sealing washer before I forget. Okay. I'm going to put a little grease on that just so when that seal goes on there, it's lubricated up. All right, so now we're ready to put this together. Slide that on through. There we go. Okay, that's in. So now you can kind of see that there's a space in here. I'm just going to lean this up so you guys can see this. There we go. And I have my new bolt with my washer. I'm going to take a drop of blue Loctite. I'm going to put it on there right now and put that together. Okay, drop of blue Loctite here. Oh. Yep. There we go. Okay, blue Loctite's on the bolt. Put that in. Get that threaded down. Okay, now I'm ready to torque this down, and I have to set this to between 500 and 1,000 kilograms with a scale, and that's the rotation of this. We're going to go through a different procedure. I'm going to show you how to set that up. All right, I got it set up in a vise the way they show you so that I can actually rotate this, and the idea is to tighten this bolt down. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this string. We're going to wrap it around here several times, and then we're going to read the scale on the spring scale, which is actually like a fish scale, okay? And we're going to pull on it, all right? And hold it straight until you read between 500 and 1,000 grams. So a strange way to do this, but this is how we did it back in when this drive was first introduced. So I'm going to tighten this up, and then I'm going to check it, and then I'm going to tighten this and check it until I set it to the right scale. All right, so for this part, you need an extra set of hands just to take the flat side in the vise, and then you can check the rolling torque here with this. And I got about 10 inch-pounds on that. Perfect. All right, so we're getting ready to put the upper gear case back together, and I'm going to show you some of the information you need to get number-wise to get together so that you can start to shim it. So let's get started on that one. All right, here's the gear case. I've already put the gears in it, and I'll show you the fixture tool in a minute. And the big thing I want to show you on the back of the case here is there are some etching numbers. So this is where the shift actuator goes. So you'll see a B etching number, a C etching number, and then an A etching number. SPE, the newer versions, and 290. The A stamping is not on the old case, okay? But the B and the C stampings are. Now these values are going to be calculated into the height of this dimension in here. And then we're going to use the etching numbers off the gear as well off the cups. So I'll show you that. All right, so here's the old gear set, and here on the cup inside you can see the etching number, and it's a hand-drawn, if I can get it to focus in there, a -3. So some of the early 290 drives, they hand etched them in there, and then I've got a newer gear set here, and you can actually see on the cup Over here, it's more like DPE, where you actually have the -2 is stamped on it. So depending on what model year, depends on what that stamping looks like, okay? So that's the start. We have to know those etching numbers, all right? And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna do some calculations with those etching numbers. Okay, so from the old 290 book, when you start the shimming, it gets pretty complex. We've already set the rolling torque on this, and then we're gonna start to assemble the gears and put it together, and then we have this nominal dimension. So there's a nominal dimension in the case, and this is for the forward gear, so always pay attention. The forward gear and the reverse gear, there's a nominal dimension. That measurement, A, is fixed at 62.05. Right now, if I come over here, it says add or subtract the plus or minus marking. That's the etching number on the gear. +5 is the marking in this case. So they come down and they do the math. 62.05 plus 0.05 gives me a new number of 62.10. Now, on the case, the letters A, B, and C are stamped in the case. So on that case, on where those stamping numbers are, A is for pinion, B is for reverse, and C is for forward. So it says only B and C's are stamped in the upper gear case. That's in the old one. On the new books with the two SPE, DPE, you have B, C is stamped on the case, but you'll see there's an A dimension as well that's stamped in the case. We'll look at that later. Okay, next I've got the drawing here, and just to give you an idea of what it looks like, I have my two gears. I've made sure that I've kept them marked, the reverse and the forward gear. So the lower is the forward gear, the upper gear is the reverse gear. The etching numbers on the gears that I have are -3 on both, amazingly. Another amazing thing was the stamping numbers in the case. You have the B stamping and the C stamping were both 83. The A stamping on mine was an earlier model. I haven't gotten to that yet, but here's the math kind of layout. So you have the gear housing. We have a nominal for that. That nominal is 62.05. That's out of the book. We have a gear nominal for each gear. It's the same number. That gear nominal is 61 millimeters. We have our etching numbers, which we have here. Those are going to be in hundredths of a millimeter. So -3 is -0.03. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the etching number from my forward gear and I'm going to subtract it from that 62.05. So then I'm going to subtract 62.05 from -0.03. That gives me a housing to gear nominal value of 62.02. The second thing I need to do is I need to take that stamping number 83, which is going to be 0.83, and I have to add that to the stamping number to the nominal dimension, all right, which is the gear nominal of 61. So that's 61.83. The third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 62.02 from 62.83, and that will give me the shims to put under that space. And that space relates to where it sits in the housing in here. So I'm going to put the shims in there, and that's going to be my forward gear. I'm going to do the exact same thing, except I'm going to do it from my reverse gear, which is the upper gear. So the third thing I need to do is I need to take this number, which is the housing dimension. Okay, I'm going to call it the housing dimension or the housing value, because I'm using the housing nominal and I'm subtracting it from the etching number. And then I'm going to subtract that number from my gear nominal, which is actually going to be the gear nominal value of 61 millimeters, all right, plus the stamping on the case. So that's going to give me 62.02 minus 61.83 gives me 0.19 millimeters. Converted is 8/1000 of an inch. So for both gears, because the math is exactly the same and the procedure's the same, in my case, both gears get 8/1000 of a shim. So I'm going to put those shims back in the case. I've already put those in for the forward and reverse. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the book and I'm going to go find this next procedure, which is to install the double bearing box, which is your pinion gear. I'm going to put that pinion gear in, and they say to add 0.4 millimeters, no O-ring in it, and tighten the F4 bolts. The next thing is to put the top cover on, add some shims. I'm going to start with the original shims and see if I can find about 0.1 millimeter clearance there. All right, snug those bolts down, snug these bolts up good. Then we're gonna set up the dial indicator. So I'll get this all reassembled and then I'll show you what it looks like with a dial indicator and we'll see where we're at. All right, I've got the top cover shimmed. I've got a clearance of about 3 thousandths here, 3 to 4 thousandths, and then I put the cover bolts on. That shims the top bearing, so you put a little crush on that bearing, so you press the bearing down into the housing. I put the original shims I took out here from the front of the bearing carrier and put those back in. I did my measurements for my gear lash. I had to take this back out to make the adjustment to get my gear lash correct. And then as you can see, so I can zoom in a little bit and you can get a feel for what that gear lash is. So the upper gear, which is the reverse gear, is about 10 thousandths of an inch. I got about 11 thousandths on the bottom, so the gear lash is correct.